Hey gamers, welcome back to Epic Encounters. Here we are again, talking about Concord, and I promise this is the third and final video on this train wreck of a game. I didn't think I'd be revisiting Concord so soon, but with all the new drama and the latest revelations, I just couldn't resist. From Concord's transgender singer character, Freegunner Bazz, to the removal of LGBTQ+ tags from Steam, and now the shutdown of the game less than 2 weeks after launch. It's like every day there's something new with this game, and not in a good way. Concord was supposed to be the next big thing for Firewalk Studios and PlayStation, but instead it's turned into one of the biggest flops of the year. It's a story of missed opportunities, poor development decisions, and a studio that seems to have been more interested in pushing its woke agenda than in creating a game that people actually wanted to play. So buckle up, because today we're going deep into what went wrong with Concord, why it crashed and burned so quickly, and why the controversy just won't stop. Let's dive in.
We laid out the plan, and it's been a matter of working really hard to deliver on that plan for many, many years. And I think but we've stayed core to what we set out to do. Concord looks like the Concord we hope, with room to grow into we had big ideas that obviously we had to build a strong foundation first, and that's what we've done, and we hope to continue building. But that strong foundation is Concord. It's what Concord has been.
One of the most talked about elements of Concord is the inclusion of a character named Freegunner Bazz, who is modelled after the transgender singer Jamila Adderley. When Adderley announced on Instagram that PlayStation had turned him into the baddest, knife-wielding assassin in all the land, it sparked a wave of reactions online. In the game, Freegunner Bazz uses she/her pronouns, but based on Adderley's original post, it's clear that Firewalk Studios designed the character to be transgender. Representation in games can be a good thing, when done right. However, the issue here isn't that Concord featured a transgender character, but how it was handled. Players quickly realized that the inclusion felt forced and disingenuous. It didn't feel like the character was there to enrich the story or offer meaningful representation. Instead, it seemed like the developers were ticking boxes, as if to say, look how progressive we are, without focusing on whether the character actually fit within the context of the game. It's also interesting to note that despite the heavy emphasis on LGBTQ+ representation, Firewalk Studios quietly removed the LGBTQ+ tag from the game on Steam. Former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern pointed this out, noting that the game had initially featured the LGBTQ+ tag as one of its top-ranked tags, but it disappeared shortly after the game's release. This move by the developers was puzzling. If they were proud of their representation, why remove the tag? Was this an attempt to attract more players who might have been turned off by the game's overt political agenda? Whatever the reason, it didn't work. Concord continued to bleed players, with its peak concurrent player count on Steam dropping from 697 on launch day to just 110 in less than 2 weeks. At this rate, the game will likely hit double-digit peak numbers soon, if it hasn't already. Let's talk about one of the biggest complaints from the gaming community, the character designs. From the very first trailer, players were put off by Concord's aesthetic. The characters were described as ugly, with bizarre proportions and an overall lack of appeal. And it wasn't just the looks. The game was also heavily criticized for its focus on pronouns. One particularly infamous moment was when players discovered that even the robots in the game had pronouns. Yes, you heard that right, a robot with pronouns. This prompted a wave of jokes and memes across social media, with players mocking the absurdity of it all. And here's where things get even worse. Instead of addressing player concerns, Firewalk Studios doubled down on their design choices. Kim Kreiners, the director of IP for Concord, stated in interviews that the characters' stories would be revealed through weekly cinematic vignettes. Kreiners seemed to think that players just needed more time to fall in love with the depth of the characters, and that they would come to appreciate the game's design choices over time. But that never happened. Players were already checked out. The ugly character designs, the forced political messaging, and the fact that Firewalk Studios ignored feedback were all major factors that drove players away. The studio clearly believed that players would come around eventually, but the numbers tell a different story. When the game launched in early access in July, it only had a peak concurrent player count of 1,124. For a game that was supposed to be a AAA title, these numbers were a massive red flag, and yet the studio seemed unfazed. By the time the game hit open beta, the numbers increased slightly to 2,388, but even then, the writing was on the wall. On PlayStation, the game was faring just as badly, with PSN profiles reporting that only 1,303 people owned the game, and only 1,264 had earned the most basic achievement: First Takedown. All of this feedback, whether it was about the character designs or the gameplay mechanics, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Instead of listening to the community, Firewalk Studios pushed forward with their original vision, believing that their ideas were infallible. But as we've seen time and time again, when developers ignore player feedback, it rarely ends well. Despite the negative reception, Firewalk Studios and PlayStation went ahead with the full release of Concord on August 23, 2024. And to no one's surprise, the game flopped hard. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that Concord was a failure. The game peaked at only 697 concurrent players on Steam on launch day, and less than 2 weeks later, that number had dropped to 110. Seeing the writing on the wall, Firewalk Studios made the decision to pull the plug. In an official blog post, Ryan Ellis, the game director, announced that the servers would be taken offline on September 6, 2024, and that the game would no longer be available for sale. To their credit, they also offered full refunds to anyone who had purchased the game on PS5 or PC. Ellis explained in the post, "At this time, we have decided to take the game offline and explore options that will better reach our players. While that may sound like typical PR talk, the reality is that there was no saving Concord. The player base had evaporated, the reviews were overwhelmingly negative, and the game's core mechanics were flawed beyond repair. It's clear that Firewalk Studios was simply cutting their losses and moving on, but the decision to offer full refunds is telling. It shows just how badly the game performed. Normally, studios would try to patch the game, introduce new content, or make changes based on player feedback. But Concord was such a failure that they didn't even bother with that. Instead, they just shut it down entirely and offered refunds, which is almost unheard of for a game of this scale. Now, let's talk about one of the most absurd takes to come out of this whole mess. IGN writer Stella Chung claimed that the reason Concord failed is because PlayStation never believed in it. According to her, the game wasn't given enough time to grow and adapt as a live service game, and that PlayStation should have given it at least 6 months to properly sit through a season. This claim is laughable for several reasons. First, PlayStation was all in on Concord from the beginning. They even acquired Firewalk Studios in April 2023 specifically to help develop and launch the game. Jim Ryan, the president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, had nothing but praise for the studio, saying, "I'm confident the studio's upcoming project will be a robust addition to PlayStation Studios' portfolio." So the idea that PlayStation didn't support the game is simply false. Second, PlayStation gave Concord multiple blog posts, 10 minutes of airtime during their state of play, and even launched an exclusive Concord-themed controller for $84.99. The game received more promotion than many other high-profile titles, and yet it still failed to capture an audience. Chung's claim that PlayStation didn't believe in the game is completely detached from reality. Finally, the idea that 6 months would have saved Concord is delusional. The game was seeing declining player numbers from the moment it launched. On launch day, it hit a peak of 697 players, and just a week later, it was down to 110. Even if they had kept the servers running for 6 months, it's unlikely that the player count would have improved. The core issues with the game were too deep to be fixed with time alone. So, what exactly went wrong with Concord? How did a game with so much potential, backed by one of the biggest names in gaming, fail so miserably? There are a few key factors that contributed to its downfall. First, the marketing. From the very first trailer, it was clear that Concord was trying to appeal to a specific niche audience. The focus on pronouns, ugly character designs, and overt political messaging turned off a large portion of the gaming community. Players didn't want to be lectured about politics or forced to engage with a story that felt more like propaganda than entertainment. Second, the gameplay itself was uninspired. While the marketing pushed the narrative and character designs, it didn't give players much to be excited about when it came to actual gameplay mechanics. Reviews consistently pointed out that the combat was lackluster, the controls were clunky, and the overall experience felt unfinished. Third, Firewalk Studios ignored player feedback. Even when players voiced their concerns during the early access and open beta phases, the studio pushed forward with its original vision, believing that players would come around eventually. But they didn't. And by the time the game launched, it was too late to course correct. Finally, the game was plagued by technical issues. Even those who were interested in the game found themselves frustrated by bugs, glitches, and server problems. In today's gaming landscape, where live service games are expected to run smoothly from day one, Concord simply couldn't keep up. In conclusion, Concord is a perfect example of how not to launch a game. From the controversial character choices and political messaging to the uninspired gameplay and technical issues, everything about this game felt like a missed opportunity. Firewalk Studios had the backing of PlayStation and the resources to create something special, but instead, they delivered a product that no one wanted to play. It's also a cautionary tale for the industry at large. Players don't want to be preached to, and they don't want to feel like they're being manipulated into supporting a specific agenda. If the focus had been on creating an engaging, fun game first and foremost, then maybe Concord could have found an audience. But as it stands, it's just another failed experiment in the world of woke gaming. What do you think about Concord's failure? Do you agree that the game was doomed from the start? Or do you think it could have been saved with better marketing and gameplay? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this one. And with that, we wrap up this deep dive into Concord. If you enjoyed this video, or if you're as shocked by Concord's failure as I am, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth gaming analysis. As always, keep exploring, keep gaming, and stay epic.
We laid out the plan, and it's been a matter of working really hard to deliver on that plan for many, many years. Yeah, and I think it has been, but we've stayed core to what we